What if the line between hope and hopelessness was drawn not by a person, but by a wild creature you barely understood? That question throbbed in the back of Rebecca Becky Grady's mind, even as every other thought slipped beneath the cold. Bitter Creek National Reserve, Wyoming in January wasn't a place for hesitation. Even in the heart of the forest, the air carried a razor edge. The world was silent, except for the wind and somewhere in the darkness, the muffled, hurried footsteps of people who wanted her dead. Becky's consciousness returned in flickers. White breath, biting wind, the sting of blood trickling from her temple. Her gloved hands, bound cruelly behind her back with heavy, rusted chain, had already begun to numb. She blinked, barely making out the silhouettes of 3 masked figures retreating into the trees, their shapes blurring into the gray of dusk. She caught only fragments of their words. Shut her up for good. She gets free. We're finished. No one's coming out here. Not in this weather. The voice was familiar, but distorted by the adrenaline and her pounding head. Then only the slap of their boots on frozen snow, and finally, nothing. She tried to scream, but the cold snatched her voice away, twisting it into a ragged gasp. Her ranger's parka, torn at the shoulder, let in the icy air. Each inhale burned, her lungs aching as she forced herself to take inventory. Right leg, pain, but maybe not broken. Arms, trapped, but no bones sticking through skin. Face, bleeding, her vision blurred by swelling above her left eye. Panic simmered under her skin. Becky, trained for emergencies, always told her rookie rangers, "If you're lost, stop, think, and listen. The woods can hide help as well as danger." Now, though, her own advice sounded naive. These men, she knew they were men, one had reeked of chewing tobacco and cheap aftershave, had gone to brutal lengths to keep her silent. Why? She knew too much. Becky's investigation into illegal logging had ruffled feathers. Poaching, too. Bitter Creek had lost 2 elk herds in the last month. She'd found traps, shell casings, and fresh tire tracks near forbidden trails. She'd warned the county sheriff, but he'd only given her a tired smile and said, "Be careful out there, Becky." She hadn't realized the warning was double-edged, that her friends might be her enemies. Now the trees loomed above her, ancient and unmoved by her suffering. Snowflakes drifted from the heavy sky, dusting her boots, catching in her hair. Time began to stretch and warp. Minutes bled into hours. Her teeth chattered. The pain in her hands grew dull, then faded altogether. A warning more than a mercy. She looked down, saw a crust of blood on her parka sleeve, her badge bent and half torn from the zipper. There was no trail, no road, no way anyone could stumble on her by accident. If help was coming, it would have to be luck, or fate. As the first wave of terror receded, something else settled in Becky's mind. Anger. A hard, bright thing, sharper than any winter wind. She refused to let her last moments be defined by fear. If this was it, if Bitter Creek swallowed her, then she'd face the end head-on. Becky gritted her teeth, trying to work the chain over the rough bark behind her. The steel cut her wrists. She felt the cold seeping through her skin, deeper, until even anger couldn't keep it out. Night fell like a closing hand. The moon, hidden by clouds, offered no comfort. Becky's thoughts began to slip. She remembered her father's voice. "You're tougher than you know, kiddo. Nature can kill you quick, but it can save you too if you pay attention." She remembered the last time she'd seen him alive, the way he'd squeezed her hand and said, "You got the wild in you, Becky. Don't let it break you." But now, the wild felt like an enemy. The silence pressed in, broken only by the distant, lonely scream of a fox A branch snapped somewhere in the darkness. Becky's head jerked up, heart hammering. She tried to call out. Only a rasp escaped her cracked lips. Was it one of the men coming back to finish the job? Or something worse? Wolves, maybe, drawn by her scent. She tried to make herself look bigger, defiant, but her body betrayed her. Another hour passed, or two. She lost count. The first real sign of hope was so small, she almost missed it. A faint sound, closer than the fox, softer than a footstep. At first she thought it was the wind. Then she saw movement. A flicker, low to the ground, barely visible in the blue snowlight. Two yellow-green eyes, wide and unblinking, reflected the moon's glow. A bobcat. Not a myth or a dream. She'd seen their prints before, but never this close. This one was scarred, gaunt, its coat streaked with frost and old wounds. It stepped closer, drawn by her blood, her scent, or maybe just curiosity. For a moment, Becky felt her fear spike. She knew what wild animals did to the wounded. She closed her eyes, bracing for claws, teeth. Instead, the bobcat only sniffed at her boots, whiskers twitching. Its breath steamed in the cold. Somewhere behind it, shadows moved. Another bobcat, maybe two, hanging back, silent as ghosts. Becky shivered, her mind spinning. What would keep her alive now? Anger, faith, or hope? If no one was coming, if help wasn't human, could she trust in the wild? Her thoughts dissolved into the dark, and she stared into the eyes of the bobcat. Maybe, she thought, the wild wasn't done with her yet. Maybe, just maybe, hope could come on 4 silent paws, somewhere between agony and the edge of sleep. Becky's mind floated. Time unraveled into strange, drifting fragments. The burn of the chain against her skin, the sting in her cheek, the distant crunch of snow. In the blizzard's hush, it felt as if she existed in 2 worlds, one teetering toward death, the other clinging desperately to the faintest glimmer of life. The wind howled through the pines, scattering snow in swirling eddies around her frozen boots. Each gust seemed to whisper, "Give up, no one's coming." But then something moved. The bobcat she'd seen, scarred, wiry, a survivor like herself, crept closer. He was more visible now, the storm swirling behind him. His coat, once golden and marked with black rosettes, was dusted with snow, his left ear tattered from some old fight. Becky could see, through a haze of pain, the ripple of muscle under his hide. She barely registered fear. There wasn't room for it anymore. Her breathing came shallow and ragged. Every shiver sent waves of pain through her body. "Go on then," she muttered, words half lost in the wind. "Do what you came for." But the bobcat, Scout, though she didn't know his name yet, didn't attack. He circled, wary, muscles coiled but eyes oddly calm. Becky watched, fascinated and numb, as he sniffed her boots, then her gloved hands where blood had pooled and frozen. Each movement was deliberate, as if the animal weighed her against some wild measure of trust or danger. For a moment, she glimpsed something almost human in his gaze, a flicker of curiosity, a puzzle waiting to be solved. Behind him, 2 more shadows flickered through the trees. Scout's mate, a sleek female, watched from the brush, yellow eyes glowing, body tense and alert. And just beyond her, 2 near-grown kittens, all fluff and oversized paws, huddled together, uncertain but drawn by the strange scene unfolding beneath the ancient pine. Becky's mind scrambled to make sense of it. Wild animals didn't linger around people, especially not wounded, desperate ones. Maybe they sensed her weakness. The predator's instinct awakened. Or maybe, impossibly, they sensed something else. The pain in Becky's wrists sharpened as she tried to flex her numb fingers. Her lips cracked when she whispered, You're not supposed to be here either. The wind gusted, swirling flakes into her eyes. For a heartbeat, she saw herself from above, a solitary human, chained to a tree, ringed by the wild, as helpless as any creature caught in a snare. But then movement, real and purposeful, broke the spell. Scout stepped forward, nose twitching. He pawed at the snow piled around Becky's legs, then at the frozen links binding her wrists. The sound of his claws scraping against the chain cut through the night. Becky stiffened, not daring to move. Was he trying to free her, or just searching for scraps of food? His mate, emboldened, slunk closer, pressing her body low to the ground. The kittens hung back, mewing softly, eyes wide. For several minutes, the family worked as a silent, wild team. Scout clawed and chewed at the icy snow packed around Becky's ankles. His mate dug at the ground, sending loose powder flying. Becky, caught between disbelief and hope, bit down on her lip until she tasted blood. She tried to shift her wrists, and the chain rattled, too tight to slip free, but not so tight that her circulation was completely cut off. She focused on the bobcat's movements, every muscle in her battered body screaming for warmth, for rescue, for anything but the slow, creeping numbness of the cold. Another gust of wind cut through the trees, and for a moment the bobcats froze, ears flattening, bodies poised for flight. Becky held her breath. If they bolted now, she was lost. The wild, she realized, offered no promises. Scout looked up, meeting her gaze. For a second, she swore he understood. He pawed again at her boots, then tugged at the hem of her torn parka with his teeth. The chain clanked, just audible above the moan of the storm. Becky's mind flickered through memories, training days, rescue missions, nights camped under the stars. She remembered telling new recruits, "Every animal out here is trying to survive, just like us. Respect that, and maybe you'll get respect back." But she'd never imagined anything like this. Each moment stretched and stretched. The cold worked deeper, finding the hollow places inside her. Her eyes drifted closed. A sharp, wet nose nudged her chin. Becky jolted, blinking hard. Scout's whiskers brushed her cheek, startling her awake. She gasped, tasting copper and ice. His mate yowled softly, a guttural warning or encouragement. She couldn't tell. The kittens paced at the tree line, torn between fear and the tug of blood ties. Somewhere in the distance, a tree branch cracked under the weight of snow. Becky flinched, nerves raw. Scout whipped around, hackles rising, but didn't flee. Instead, he placed himself between Becky and the sound, tail lashing. His mate joined him, the two adults bristling, ready to defend this unlikely space. A wounded human and a wild family drawn together by circumstance and need. The storm howled, shrouding the forest in blinding white. Becky, shivering uncontrollably now, wondered if this was the end or the start of something impossible. She thought of her father's words, how trust sometimes comes when you stop trying to control the wild and simply endure it. Her vision blurred as exhaustion threatened to take her, but she forced herself to watch as Scout returned to her side. He dug at the snow once more, pawed at her chains with renewed determination. Becky let herself believe just for a moment that help could come from the wild. That even at the edge of hopelessness, a creature's instinct for survival could become something more, an act of unlikely mercy. As the night deepened, she clung to that fragile thread, refusing to let go. Would the bobcats succeed, or would the cold win? The answer hung in the balance, as uncertain and fierce as the storm itself. Night pressed its full weight down on the pines. The storm eased, leaving the forest cloaked in eerie silence, broken only by the occasional hiss of wind and the faint yowl of Scout's family drifting through the darkness. Becky Grady, shivering and bruised, drifted somewhere between waking and sleep, past and present. Pain radiated through her limbs, but in the thick of cold and fear, her mind slipped loose from her body. She felt herself floating, her head lolled forward, chin pressing to her chest. Blood had frozen on her cheek. Her lips split and bled in the cold. She couldn't feel her fingers, nor her toes. She heard her breathing, slow, ragged, getting softer by the hour. The wild seemed to press closer, as if the trees themselves leaned in to watch. A voice broke through the fog, warm and familiar, as if conjured from some other time. "You can't control everything, Becky. Sometimes you just have to trust. Let the wild be wild. It'll teach you what you can't learn any other way." Her father's voice, quiet, worn by years of ranch work and long nights around campfires. She remembered his hands, cracked and sure, lighting the lantern outside their cabin on winter evenings. For a moment, she was a child again, curled up on his knee, safe beneath a scratchy wool blanket. The memories came in waves. She saw herself at 10, hauling a snare from the underbrush with a trembling grip. The snare held a half-grown bobcat, all spit and terror, its paw bloodied, eyes wide with fear. She'd screamed for her father, who'd come running, boots pounding the frost. Together they'd freed the animal, her father murmuring, "You don't turn away when something wild needs help, even if it's scared, even if it'd claw you for trying." That night, they'd watched from the porch as the bobcat limped back into the trees, a silver shape fading into dusk. "Maybe he'll remember," her father had said. "Or maybe he won't. That's not why you help. You help because you can." Back in the darkness, Becky's heart clenched. She wondered, groggy and half-frozen, if the wild ever truly forgot kindness, or if it waited for its chance to repay it in strange, silent ways. She felt Scout's breath on her leg, warm and moist. His low chuff, almost a purr, rumbled through the stillness. Becky turned her head with effort, blinking at the shadows. The bobcat watched her, head cocked, as if puzzled by her weakness. His mate's eyes glowed in the gloom, 2 gold coins flickering at the edge of vision. The kittens nestled close to their mother, both trembling, but neither fled. Becky wondered if she looked more animal than human now, bleeding, shivering, trapped. There was no line between predator and prey, not here, only survival. She tried to speak, but her voice was a cracked whisper. "Hey there. Not gonna hurt you. Just stuck is all." The words drifted away, caught by the wind. Scout blinked, slow and deliberate, as if he'd heard her all the same. Pain flared in Becky's wrists as she twisted, searching for any slack in the chain. The cold had numbed her so thoroughly she barely registered the raw flesh or the blood soaking her gloves. In the haze of pain, she remembered something else. Her first night alone on patrol, years before. The forest had terrified her then. So vast, so indifferent, every snapping twig a threat. But she'd learned to listen, to notice the small things. A flash of fur, the hush of wings, the heartbeat of the land beneath her boots. Now, as her body threatened to betray her, Becky wished for that same certainty, the deep, unspoken trust that the wild was watching. Scout edged closer, brushing her knee with his flank. Becky flinched, but the bobcat only sat, tail curled around his paws, as if standing guard. His mate pressed forward, sniffing at Becky's boots, wary but curious. The kittens tumbled after her, bolder now, drawn by her scent and her stillness. Becky felt a strange gratitude for their warmth, for their company, for the reminder that even here at the edge of life and death, she was not alone. Somewhere deep inside, a spark caught. Becky thought of all the creatures she'd protected as a ranger, all the traps she'd dismantled, all the poachers she'd chased through these woods. She'd always told herself it was duty, but maybe it was something more. Maybe she believed, deep down, that mercy mattered, that the wild noticed, that kindness echoed in ways she'd never understand. She drifted again, back into memory. Her father's laughter, full and booming, filling the tiny cabin, the taste of wood smoke on her tongue, the feel of a tiny, trembling bobcat heartbeat in her hands years ago. "You can't control what happens out here," he'd told her, "but you can choose who you are, even when nobody's watching." Was anyone watching now? Or was it just luck, fate, instinct, the tangled threads that sometimes, impossibly, bound two worlds together? The wind shifted. Becky shivered, clinging to the last threads of consciousness. Her thoughts grew slow and thick, like syrup poured over snow. She wanted to live. She realized that suddenly, fiercely. Not for vengeance, not even for justice, but for the wild things that trusted her, for the people who might someday remember her story. Scout rose, circled her once, and sat again, close enough that she could feel his heat through her torn parka. His family settled nearby, silent but watchful. Becky squeezed her eyes shut, forcing herself to breathe. The pain faded. In its place, something gentler took root. Not hope, not yet, but a fragile peace. Sometimes, she thought, the only comfort in darkness comes from those we least expect. Even the wild, in its own way, could offer grace. And so, on the knife edge between two worlds, Becky let herself believe, for a moment, that she wasn't done, that the story wasn't over, that trust, once given, could return, even at the end of all things. Darkness reigned over Bitter Creek, each hour colder and quieter than the last. Frost claimed Becky Grady inch by inch, first her toes, then her cheeks, then the tips of her fingers. Time slowed to the space between breaths, and every second felt like it might be her last. But even as her strength ebbed, she sensed the wild pressing in, unwilling to let her fade alone. Becky's body ached to sleep, to let go and slip beneath the hush of snow and pain. Every instinct screamed for her to surrender. She'd heard about hypothermia from seasoned rangers, how it crept in soft as a lullaby, coaxing the mind to drift away, promising peace and warmth just before the end. She forced her eyes open, fighting the sleep that tried to claim her, staring at the blurred shapes of Scout and his family in the moonlight. Scout, relentless and battered, pawed at her chains with renewed urgency. His claws clinked against metal, echoing through the night. He stopped now and then, breath fogging, whiskers twitching, as if listening for some secret sign. Each time Becky's eyes fluttered closed, he nudged her awake, his coarse fur brushing her shin, the wild scent of pine and animal musk rousing her from the brink. Somewhere deep inside, Becky recognized that this was a test. She was alone, truly alone, in a way she'd never been before. No radio, no partner, no way to signal for help. Her mind spun with the impossible choice: stay awake, clinging to pain and sanity, or let herself slip away and trust her fate to whatever forces ruled these woods. The chain felt tighter by the minute, her wrists raw and swollen. The cold gnawed at her, but beneath that, another fear took root. Fear of madness, of losing her mind in the endless dark. Scout's mate crept closer, dropping pine boughs over Becky's legs, covering her as she would a shivering kitten. It wasn't enough to banish the cold, but it dulled the sting. The kittens, wide-eyed and trembling, nestled against their mother's side, watching Becky with a strange mixture of curiosity and caution. In the strange light, Becky wondered if she'd hallucinated all of it. No one would believe this story. No one. A sharp wind rattled the branches, and snow fell in thick clumps onto Becky's lap. Scout turned and pressed himself at her feet, curling his body into a tight, protective circle. She felt the surprising warmth of his fur seep through her boots, a fleeting relief. He stayed there, guarding her from the wind and whatever else might lurk in the darkness. Becky's mind wandered to the line between wild and tame. She'd always believed in boundaries, rules to keep rangers safe, animals safe, the forest safe. But here, at the edge of everything, those rules dissolved. What was left was something raw and real, the pure instinct to survive, and somehow a fragile connection to these wild creatures who had every reason to leave her to her fate. Her mind drifted again to the night her father had died. She'd been 17, old enough to know how the world worked, but still naive about how quickly it could change. A snowstorm, a fallen tree, a moment's distraction, and suddenly she was alone. That loss had shaped her, made her wary, made her build walls even as she gave her all to the forest. Now, in the hush beneath the pines, those old wounds ached fresh. The urge to give in, to sleep, to let go, it almost won. But then Scout's body shifted against her, his fur vibrating with a low, persistent purr. The sound, unexpected, almost comforting, anchored Becky to the moment. She remembered her own words to new recruits. Trust can be a risk, but sometimes it's the only thing that'll save you. She'd meant it as advice for partnerships, but maybe it was true for the wild too. Her thoughts tangled with dreams. She saw her father again, reaching out a hand. "You gotta choose, kiddo," he said, his voice rough but kind. "You can surrender to fear, or you can trust yourself, the wild, whatever's left when everything else is gone." Becky wanted to take his hand, but the vision faded. She was left with Scout, with the ache of cold and hope. Every part of her wanted to sleep, but every time her head drooped, Scout nudged her, demanding she stay. She forced herself to talk, just to keep her mind awake. "You're stubborn," she whispered, voice choked. "Reminds me of someone I used to know." Her breath hung in the air, and she felt the absurd urge to laugh, at herself, at the world, at the idea that her survival might hinge on the stubbornness of a wild bobcat. Time passed in fragments. She counted her heartbeats, listened to the kitten's mewling, the low, steady chuffs of Scout beside her. The pain in her wrists and feet grew distant, replaced by the dull throb of exhaustion. But she kept fighting, if only because Scout wouldn't let her stop. At last, Becky made her choice. Not to fight the wild, but to trust it. She allowed her head to rest gently on Scout's back, his fur bristling against her cheek. She let the bobcat's warmth and the pine boughs shield her from the worst of the cold. She whispered into the darkness, "If you're out there, Dad, if you're watching, I'm still here. I'm not giving up." Somewhere between waking and sleep, Becky let herself surrender. Not to the cold, not to fear, but to a fragile faith that connection could exist, even at the edge of wildness. She closed her eyes, feeling the steady heartbeat of Scout beneath her hand, the gentle rise and fall of his breath, the wild's quiet promise that she was not alone. And as the first hints of dawn crept into the pines, Becky Grady, ranger, survivor, and now perhaps something more, drifted into a sleep not of defeat, but of trust. Dawn crept over Bitter Creek with a pale, uncertain light, the first rays slicing through the snow-laden branches and casting long shadows over the forest floor. For Becky Grady, time had lost its edges. Night and pain, Sleep and waking, all had bled together into a single shivering ordeal. Yet with the morning, something shifted. Cold still gripped her bones, but the darkness had lifted. She was not dead. Not yet. She stirred beneath the pine boughs, confusion warring with relief. The world was strangely hushed. Scout's warm, muscular body still pressed against her feet, his breath slow and steady in the chill. At her side, the female bobcat stretched, then nudged her kittens, who blinked in the half-light, uncertain whether to fear this battered human or trust her. Becky's heart ached with gratitude and with wonder at the wild, strange mercy, but as the sun clawed higher, the bobcat family grew restless. Scout's mate padded away through the trees, the kittens trailing behind, their forms blending into the frosty brush. Scout remained. He circled Becky, sniffing her hands, then raised his head and let out a long, echoing yowl, raw and wild, the kind of sound that reverberated between the mountains and rattled the hidden things in the forest. The call rolled through the trees, startling Becky fully awake. It was a warning, a summons, a desperate demand for attention. Becky barely had strength to wonder who or what would answer. The forest, so vast and indifferent the night before, now seemed on the edge of revelation. Scout paced, yowling again, tail slashing the snow. Becky tried to shift her body, working her wrists against the chain. It didn't budge. Pain flared, sharp and bright, driving a whimper from her throat. She felt her vision blur. Was this her last chance? Was anyone out there to hear? The forest's silence shattered. Somewhere in the distance, a faint mechanical whine growing louder. Becky's heart leapt. Snowmobiles? For a moment she wondered if it was the men who had left her for dead, coming back to finish their work. But Scout's behavior changed. The big bobcat darted forward, yowling louder, planting himself firmly at Becky's side as the whine grew to a roar. Through the trees, bright parkas flashed, a search party, red and orange against the white. At their head was Jack Reynolds, Becky's new partner, rugged and broad-shouldered, his face grim with worry. Volunteers trailed behind him, all wide-eyed and wary. The rescue party skidded to a stop as they saw the scene. Becky, chained and half-frozen to a pine, and the wild bobcat standing over her, yowling as if he owned the woods. Jack hesitated. The other rangers hung back, uncertain whether to approach. "Easy! Easy!" Jack called, raising his hands. "That cat's not letting anyone near." The air vibrated with tension. Scout stood his ground, fur bristling, fangs bared in warning. But Becky found her voice. "Jack, it's okay. He's with me." Her words were hoarse, almost a croak, but they carried across the snow. Scout glanced back at her, then stepped aside, tail twitching, as if granting permission. Jack rushed forward, dropping to his knees in front of Becky, his face pale with shock and relief. "Jesus, Grady, we thought—" He cut himself off, pulling bolt cutters from his pack. "Let's get you out of here." His gloved hands shook as he snapped the chain, freeing Becky's bruised wrists. The metal clattered to the snow, and Becky gasped, the pain sharp and glorious. She reached out, gripping Jack's arm. "The men who did this, they're still out there." Her words slurred from exhaustion, but Jack nodded, jaw set. "We found tracks, Becky. Tire marks headed north. And—" He hesitated, glancing back at the other rangers. "We found this." He held up a torn scrap of dark fabric. Becky's eyes widened. It was a piece of a sheriff's department jacket, the insignia clear even through the grime and blood. The implication hit her like a slap. An inside job. Betrayal from someone in uniform. Becky's gut twisted, rage and disbelief warring inside her. She looked at Jack, seeing her own shock mirrored in his eyes. Before she could process it, Scout let out another yowl, a sound torn from the heart of the forest. He circled the snowmobile, brushing against Becky's leg, refusing to leave until she was loaded carefully onto the sled, wrapped in blankets and trembling. The volunteers glanced uneasily at the Bobcat, but Becky's steady, battered gaze silenced any protest. As the snowmobile roared to life, Scout ran alongside, his stride effortless, his wild eyes fixed on Becky until the machine lurched forward. Only when she was safely in motion, surrounded by the living, did the big Bobcat stop. He watched the party disappear into the pines, yowling once more, a cry equal parts triumph and warning. Jack squeezed Becky's hand as they sped toward the ranger station. "You're a damn legend, Grady. The whole town's been out looking." Becky nodded weakly, trying to take it in. Her body hurt everywhere, but she was alive. She'd been saved by the wild, by a creature no one would have trusted, no one but her. And somewhere in the swirling snow behind them, the Bobcat faded back into the trees, leaving only his prints and the echo of his call. But the victory was bittersweet. There was danger yet. The sheriff's jacket fragment burned in Becky's hand, a new kind of wound. She knew the rescue was just the beginning. Whoever had left her for dead still roamed these woods, and the wild, beast and human alike, wasn't finished with her. As Bitter Creek slipped away behind them, Becky clung to the only thing she could trust, the bond that had saved her, wild and impossible, and the knowledge that some fights had only just begun. The world at the ranger station felt artificial, too bright, too warm, too far from the ragged edge of survival. Yet even as the paramedics swarmed her, wrapping her in heated blankets, checking her vitals, Becky Grady's mind was still with Scout, somewhere out in the frozen wild. She could feel the ghost of his fur against her calves, the phantom warmth that had kept her alive. The nurse dabbed ointment on her torn wrists and pressed a cup of broth into her hands, but Becky's eyes were drawn again and again to the window, scanning the line of pines at the edge of the parking lot. The official debrief was a blur. Sheriff Mark Dalton, tall, square-jawed, his badge gleaming, arrived with deputies, all sympathy and outrage. "We'll get the bastards who did this," he swore, his hand heavy on Becky's shoulder. No stone unturned. But Becky caught the sideways glances among the volunteers, the nervous set of Jack's jaw. The torn sheriff's jacket, stuffed in an evidence bag on the table, said more than words ever could. Inside betrayal. The law itself was compromised. As dusk slid across Bitter Creek, Becky found herself alone in her tiny office. Her body ached with every movement, but her mind buzzed with questions. Why her? Who had turned? How deep did the rot go? Outside, the wind howled, rattling the glass. Becky forced herself to sit up, clutching her badge, bent and battered but still hers. A flicker at the window caught her eye. 2 yellow orbs glowed in the falling dark. Scout. The Bobcat stood on the edge of the lot, tail flicking, his scarred face reflected in the glass. He looked somehow less wild and more real, as if he carried part of Becky's ordeal in his wary gaze. A second set of eyes appeared behind him, his mate, then 2 smaller ones. The whole family had come, watching, waiting. A strange comfort filled Becky. She wasn't sure if Scout lingered to protect her, to check on her, or simply out of curiosity. Maybe it didn't matter. Maybe it was just the way of things, some invisible bond, forged in pain and survival that tied them together. She pressed her palm to the window. "Thank you," she whispered, voice hoarse. Scout flicked his ears, then disappeared into the shadows. The moment didn't last. Suddenly, alarms blared, a harsh, metallic shriek splitting the quiet. The hallway lights strobed red. Becky lurched upright, pain forgotten. She grabbed her radio, but static hissed. Through the chaos, she caught Jack's voice. "Grady, lockdown, main entrance, armed suspects." His words were clipped, urgent. The threat had followed her here. They hadn't come for questions. They'd come to finish what they started. Shouts echoed from the lobby. Becky's heart hammered in her chest. She ducked behind her desk, blood pounding in her ears. Her sidearm, gone, confiscated for evidence. She had nothing but a heavy metal flashlight. Footsteps thudded in the corridor, close and fast. A crash, a curse. One of the attackers kicked in the staff door. "Find her! She's a liability. Boss wants it quiet." Becky recognized the voice. A volunteer from the search party, his face blurred by adrenaline and betrayal. Her breath caught. No time to wonder who else was dirty. She crouched lower, ready to swing if they came any closer. Suddenly, the security lights in the back lot snapped on, blinding and bright. Outside, Scout leaped atop a snowbank, tail lashing, yowling so loudly it rattled the glass. His mate joined in, snarling, teeth bared. The kittens, half-grown but bold, darted between their parents, their cries sharp and wild. The attackers hesitated. "What the hell?" one muttered, turning to the commotion. Becky seized her chance. She lunged, slamming the flashlight into the nearest attacker's knee. He crumpled with a howl, dropping his gun. Becky kicked it away, adrenaline and fear fueling her. Another attacker spun toward her, but Jack burst through the door, tackling him to the ground. The two men crashed into a file cabinet, sending papers flying. Outside, the wild chorus reached fever pitch. The Bobcats clawed at the window, their fury a living thing. One attacker tried to scramble out the back door, only to find Scout's mate blocking his path, spitting and hissing. He stumbled back, tripped over the kittens and fell. The noise, the chaos, it was enough. Jack pinned the second attacker and cuffed him, then turned to Becky. "You okay?" "Fine," she gasped, clutching her ribs. "Thanks to our friends out there." Jack looked out, eyes wide with wonder. "I've never seen anything like it." Becky limped to the door, flinging it open. Scout stood at the threshold, chest heaving, eyes fixed on Becky. For a moment, they simply stared at one another. Two survivors, neither quite belonging in the world of men or beasts. Becky knelt, wincing at the pain, and bowed her head. "Thank you," she whispered again. The Bobcats melted into the night, their work done. When the authorities arrived, real ones this time, the story spread quickly. A ranger ambushed by her own, saved by the very wild she was sworn to protect. Whispers filled the town, of corruption, of redemption, and of the Bobcats who'd fought like guardians for a wounded woman. That night, as Becky lay in her cot, safe at last, she realized something had changed forever. The wild wasn't just a place she protected. It was a force that, for reasons she'd never fully understand, had protected her in return. And somewhere in the darkness, Scout's eyes watched over her, untamed and loyal, as the boundaries between worlds grew thinner than ever before. Snow glistened blue under the moon as Bitter Creek's uneasy peace dissolved. In the aftermath of the ranger station attack, everything changed. The sheriff's department swept in, launching a formal investigation. But behind every badge, Becky Grady now saw the shadow of betrayal. The evidence, the torn jacket, the suspicious volunteers, the whispered warnings, refused to let her rest. And above all, a single question pulsed in her mind. Who had ordered her left for dead? Jack Reynolds never left Becky's side. He'd seen too much to trust anyone else. The two rangers spent long hours poring over tire tracks, security logs, and the battered remains of Becky's bloodied parka. They mapped the sequence of events, comparing stories from volunteers. The puzzle pieces circled a single name, Sheriff Mark Dalton, the man who'd promised justice, the mentor who'd taught Becky everything about the wild. The revelation cut deep. Dalton wasn't just her boss. He was a father figure to half the town, his word gospel in Bitter Creek. Yet the pattern was undeniable. Phone logs showed late-night calls to the missing deputies. Receipts placed Dalton's truck near the restricted forest roads on the night Becky was attacked. And then there was the jacket, a detail no one but someone in uniform would have left behind. One icy morning, as dawn painted the pines in pink and gold, Becky and Jack stood by the window, the evidence spread between them. "Are we sure?" Jack asked, voice low. Becky hesitated, staring at the familiar signature on an old search warrant, Dalton's handwriting. She thought of the years he'd guided her, the trust she'd placed in him. "We have to be," she whispered. "If we're wrong, we'll ruin an innocent man. But if we're right, then nobody's safe until we stop him." They made a plan. Gather everything, confront Dalton face to face and record his reaction. The risk was enormous, but nothing else would work. Too many in the department owed their jobs, or their silence, to the sheriff. Only the truth, cold and hard, would break the chain of fear. That afternoon, Becky and Jack drove to Dalton's home, a rustic lodge on the edge of the reserve. Scout trailed behind, a silent shadow in the trees, ever watchful. Becky sensed the Bobcat's presence even when she couldn't see him. Some part of her was tuned to the wild now, as if her ordeal had left her with a sixth sense for danger and loyalty both. Dalton answered the door with a smile, his voice warm as always. "Becky, Jack, didn't expect you two out here. Everything all right?" Jack's jaw was tight. "We need to talk, Sheriff. Inside." Dalton let them in, closing the door softly behind him. The air in the lodge was thick with wood smoke and tension. Becky sat at the kitchen table, spreading out the evidence. The torn jacket, phone records, photos of tire tracks. Dalton's eyes narrowed as he took it in. "What's all this?" he asked, feigning confusion. Becky didn't flinch. "Mark, I need you to tell me the truth. About the night I was attacked. About the deputies who disappeared. About your truck by Bitter Creek Road." Dalton's face shifted, just for a moment. Then he laughed, a hollow, tired sound. "This is ridiculous. You think I had something to do with what happened to you?" Jack spoke quietly. "We know you did. We have proof. And we're recording this, Mark." Silence stretched between them. Dalton's hand trembled as he picked up the jacket scrap, thumb rubbing the insignia. His eyes darted to the door. "You don't understand," he muttered. "You think this is about money? It's bigger than that. The people I'm dealing with, they don't forgive mistakes. I tried to warn you off, Becky. I tried," she cut him off, voice shaking with anger. "You almost got me killed. You let criminals turn Bitter Creek into their hunting ground. For what? Money? Power?" Dalton's mask cracked, his shoulders sagged. "I'm sorry," he whispered, "but it's too late now." In that moment, another figure appeared. Deputy Mike Howie, Dalton's right-hand man. He stepped from the hallway, gun raised, his face pale with fear and rage. "Nobody's leaving here," he barked, the weapon swinging between Becky and Jack. The world shrank to a razor's edge. Becky froze, heart pounding. Jack moved to shield her, but Howie fired. A wild shot, shattering a window and sending splinters flying. "Drop it!" Jack yelled, diving for cover. Becky ducked, crawling toward the kitchen island. Dalton stood rooted, horror on his face. A sudden yowl split the air, raw, wild, furious. Scout crashed through the shattered window in a flurry of claws and fur, eyes blazing. He launched himself at Howie, slashing at his arm and sending the gun skittering across the floor. Howie screamed, stumbling backward, Scout hot on his heels, his mate yowling from outside. Jack lunged, tackling Howie and pinning him to the floor as Scout bared his teeth, fur bristling. Becky grabbed the fallen gun, training it on the two men. "It's over!" she shouted, breath ragged. Dalton collapsed into a chair, defeated. "Do what you have to," he whispered. Sirens howled in the distance. The real deputies, called by Jack's hidden radio. Becky sagged against the counter, tears stinging her eyes. The wild had saved her again, fierce and fearless, cutting through human corruption with the certainty of instinct. Scout watched her, chest heaving, eyes bright with something like understanding. As the police stormed the lodge, cuffing Dalton and Howie, Becky reached out, brushing Scout's fur with trembling fingers. "Thank you," she whispered. "You found me. Again." In the chaos, a new bond had been forged, one between wild and human, built in the crucible of betrayal and rescue. And in that snowy kitchen, as dawn spilled gold over the pines, Becky finally understood. Trust was born not from blood or law, but from the raw moments when survival was shared, and the wild chose to stand with her. The sirens faded, leaving only the wind's hush and the crackle of police radios outside Sheriff Dalton's lodge. When Becky Grady finally stepped out into the dawn, her legs nearly gave out. Jack caught her elbow, steady and solid. Around them, deputies hurried to secure the scene, but the town's old order had been broken. Dalton sat in the back of a patrol SUV, face drawn and haunted. Howie, bleeding from Scout's attack, muttered curses as medics patched his wounds. Bitter Creek's secrets had spilled into the snow, and nothing would ever be the same. Becky's own wounds throbbed in the chill, but for the first time since that night under the pines, the ache wasn't only pain. It was proof that she'd survived, that she'd fought through darkness and betrayal, not alone but with the help of wild allies who asked for nothing in return. As officers hustled back and forth, she spotted Scout and his mate at the edge of the woods, their bodies tense, eyes alert. The kittens, now more bold than frightened, shadowed their parents. Becky knelt, holding her breath, as Scout limped forward, a bloody streak across his flank where Howie's bullet had grazed him. "Scout," Becky called softly, voice trembling with awe and gratitude. The big Bobcat paused, ears swiveling, then hobbled closer. His steps were careful, the pain clear in every movement, but he stood tall, a survivor's pride in every line of his body. His mate hovered close, and the kittens mewed anxiously. Jack knelt beside Becky, eyes wide. "He's hurt bad. We need to help him." A plan formed instantly. Becky reached for her radio. "Dispatch, this is Grady. I need Doc Lyle at the East Trailhead, urgent. We've got an injured Bobcat, possible gunshot wound. And he saved my life." Repeat. He saved my life. Word spread through Bitter Creek faster than wildfire. Within half an hour, the wildlife vet arrived, sedative gun and trauma kit ready. The vet, a grizzled man with gentle hands, eyed Scout with a mixture of caution and respect. "You sure about this, Ranger?" "He's the reason I'm alive," Becky replied simply. Jack, Becky, and Doc Lyle worked as a team, approaching slowly. Scout watched them, wary but unmoving. When Doc fired the tranquilizer, the Bobcat barely flinched. His gaze never left Becky's. The world held its breath as the vet checked the wound, cleaned the fur, and stitched the flesh closed. When Scout finally slipped under, his mate prowled the shadows, low and threatening. But she did not interfere. It was as if she understood. For this one moment, their worlds had to overlap. By noon, the town was buzzing with the story, Reporters lined the station's snow-packed lot, jostling for interviews. Locals, some who'd never trusted rangers or the wild, showed up with blankets, food, and donations for Scout's recovery. Kids left notes taped to Becky's office door. "Thank you for saving our Bobcat," and "The wild is on your side." For a place as small and stubborn as Bitter Creek, it was a transformation. Jack's hand rested on Becky's shoulder as they watched Scout awaken in the vet's makeshift recovery pen. "You know, Grady, I think you're the first person in history to owe their life to a bobcat." Becky let herself laugh, a deep, full laugh that loosened something inside her. "He's not just a bobcat, I don't know, proof that the wild keeps its own kind of score." Scout blinked awake, golden eyes meeting Becky's with calm recognition. He didn't purr, didn't nuzzle. He simply sat up, proud and wild, and stared through the chain link as if daring anyone to challenge his place here. In the days that followed, Bitter Creek changed. With Dalton and Howie awaiting trial, the truth about the illegal logging and poaching networks spilled out. Deputies resigned, others confessed, and the county sent new officers to rebuild what had been broken. For the first time in years, the reserve felt safe and proud. Becky's own wounds healed slowly. She bore new scars, on her wrists, her cheek, and deeper invisible ones across her heart. But she wore them like medals, reminders that survival was never a solo effort. She visited Scout daily, bringing water and strips of venison. Jack joined her every morning, always with coffee, always with a gentle nudge to rest, to take care of herself, too. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the pines and the world glowed with that fleeting golden light, Doc Lyle gave the all-clear. "He's strong enough. Time to set him free." Becky and Jack hiked with Scout and his family to the forest edge, a dozen townsfolk trailing behind, whispering in awe. Becky knelt and unclipped the gate. Scout paused, then slipped past her, tail flicking. His mate and kittens followed, melting into the green-gold twilight. Just before he vanished, Scout looked back, one long, searching stare. Becky met his gaze, feeling the old fear, the old wonder, and a deep gratitude that brought tears to her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, voice barely more than breath. "Go wild. Stay safe." That night, the news ran the story. Wounded ranger saved by bobcat. Community rallies for change. Donations poured in for the reserve's new wildlife fund. The town petitioned to designate Scout's territory a protected zone, and signs went up. "Wildlife crossing. Drive slow. This land belongs to all of us." Becky, newly promoted as the leader of a reformed ranger unit, accepted her post with quiet pride. Jack stood beside her at the induction, his loyalty unshakable. The community had changed, and so had she. Some evenings, Becky would spot Scout's family in the dusk, never tame, always wild, but present, watchful. Sometimes she'd hear their calls echoing across the pines, a secret reminder that the wild kept its promises. That night in the snow had marked her forever, not just as a survivor, but as a friend to the untamed. For the first time in years, Becky felt whole. Her scars did not define her. Her survival did. And as Scout's family watched from the shadows, Becky knew that a new trust had taken root in Bitter Creek, one that might just last as long as the pines themselves. Spring crept quietly into Bitter Creek, coaxing life from snowdrifts and stony ground alike. One morning, Becky Grady sat on her porch, boots propped on the rail, journal open on her knees. The scars on her wrists had faded to thin, white lines, but the memories lived in every heartbeat, every breath of pine-scented air. In the distance, the woods glimmered with new green, sunlight spilling gold between the trees. Birdsong echoed from the ridge, It was peace, but never silence, always a reminder that the wild was alive, restless, and watching. She'd started writing again, a ritual she'd lost in years of worry and routine. Now her words came in slow, careful lines, thoughts she'd been carrying since the night she was left for dead, and rescued by creatures the world still called dangerous. March 30th. The wild is waking up. Sometimes I think I am too. I keep thinking about trust. How much of my life I spent trying to control everything, trying to predict who I could count on and who would turn away. But the wild doesn't care about plans. It doesn't reward you for being careful or for being strong. It gives you moments, sometimes raw, sometimes terrifying, where you either reach for help or you don't. I survived not because I was tough or clever or brave. I survived because something untamable saw me and decided, for one moment, to stand beside me. She glanced up as Jack crossed the yard, a battered thermos in his hand. He'd settled into his new role as her partner, equal parts protector, skeptic, and friend. Jack dropped onto the porch swing, boots creaking. Writing another chapter? Trying to, Becky smiled, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. Feels like everything changed, but nothing did. Jack sipped his coffee, eyes on the woods. The world turns, Grady. We just see it a little different now. She nodded, glancing toward the trees where Scout's family sometimes lingered, wild shapes flickering in the shadows. Do you think they remember? She asked quietly. Jack shrugged. Maybe. Or maybe it's us who have to remember what it felt like to not be in charge for once, to just trust. That night in the snow returned to Becky in fragments. Scout's eyes, the chuff of his breath, the weight of his body warming her frozen feet. The moment when she realized that survival wasn't always a battle. You had to let yourself be saved. There was no shame in it. In fact, maybe that was where real courage lived. Some people think wild things are just dangerous, but I learned something different. The wild isn't cruel or kind. It's honest. When it saves you, it isn't because you deserve it, or because you asked. It's because for 1 second, your need matches the wild's instinct to act. You're not in control. You're just part of something bigger, scarier, and more beautiful than you can ever explain. The ripple from Becky's ordeal spread wider than she'd expected. News stories about Scout and the poaching bust traveled far beyond Bitter Creek, sparking debate and wonder. Donations poured in for the new Wildlife Rescue Fund. Policy meetings followed, heated, passionate, sometimes exhausting. Becky was called to speak before state officials, her voice trembling as she described not just her rescue but the lesson that people and the wild could coexist if only they paid attention to the small mercies that nature sometimes offered. A week after Scout's release, Becky led a school field trip into the reserve. The children listened wide-eyed as she told the story, not just of what she endured, but of what she learned. You don't always know where help will come from, she told them, voice soft but strong. Sometimes you just have to accept it, even if it doesn't look the way you expect. Sometimes it has whiskers and claws and gold-green eyes. In the months that followed, something changed in Bitter Creek. Road signs went up near the reserve, warning drivers to watch for bobcats. Illegal logging dried up, the new sheriff working side by side with the rangers. Locals left offerings for Scout's family, bowls of water, a few scraps of venison, sometimes a shiny trinket. The wild would always be wild, but now the town honored it as something sacred, not just something to fear. Becky's journals filled with stories, not all of survival, but of gratitude and humility. She wrote about the way the air smelled after rain, the tracks she'd learned to follow, the trembling hands of a boy who released a fox from a snare, and the look on Scout's face the last time she saw him. A creature neither pet nor enemy, just a presence, silent and enduring. Maybe the lesson isn't that the wild needs saving. Maybe it's that we do. Maybe the world is a little safer, a little more whole, every time we let ourselves be helped. Healing came slowly. Becky sometimes woke at night, tangled in dreams of snow and chains, but always there was a moment, a warm presence, a soft chuff, a reminder that she was never truly alone. She leaned into the changes, promoted to lead the ranger unit, her cabin now a kind of gathering place for rookies and old-timers alike. She found purpose not in controlling the wild, but in living alongside it. She wrote one last note for herself, a truth she hoped she'd never forget. We survive not just by fighting, but by allowing ourselves to be saved. Sometimes, the wild teaches us how to be truly human. As dusk slipped into night and the pines turned black against a star-pricked sky, Becky put her journal aside. She breathed in the crisp air, listening for the echo of a yowl, the scuffle of paws through fallen needles. She knew the wild couldn't promise safety, or even kindness, but it could promise connection, moments when two worlds met, not as enemies, but as unlikely friends. And with that, Becky Grady let herself rest, certain that the story she carried was bigger than fear or pain or even survival itself. Spring deepened its hold on Bitter Creek, the last hints of snow shrinking to shadowy hollows beneath the tallest pines. Everywhere else, the world glowed green and gold. Buds unfurled on trembling branches, and the creek, free of its icy prison, babbled with the business of new life. It was the season of return, birds, wildflowers, and for Rebecca Becky Grady, a sense of belonging that felt hard-won and wholly new. On a Saturday morning, Becky laced her boots with the old practiced care, then set out with Jack Reynolds for a hike along the high ridge above the reserve. The air was sweet with promise, and Becky moved with a limp that was now a familiar part of her stride. She'd come to accept it, a reminder of all she'd survived, and of the wild trust that had saved her. Jack, ever the steady presence, fell into step beside her. "Ready to see if Scout's still keeping tabs on us?" he teased, tipping his hat toward the forest beyond. "Always," Becky replied, her smile quick and real. "You know, I never thought I'd look forward to being watched by a bobcat." Their laughter echoed through the pines, light and sure. The trail wound up the ridge, sunlight dappling the path. Everywhere the world buzzed with renewal, insects in the grass, the call of a distant hawk, the dart and flicker of a red squirrel spiraling up a trunk. For the first time in years, Becky felt herself moving in harmony with the wild, not against it. At a bend in the trail, they paused. Far below, the creek snaked silver through the valley. Becky leaned on a weathered stump and drew a slow breath. Jack scanned the ridgeline, his voice hushed. "Ever wonder why it all happened? Why you? Why Scout?" Becky considered. "Not anymore. I stopped asking why and started asking what it meant, what I was supposed to learn." Jack nodded, quiet. "And?" She looked toward the trees, the green so vivid it hurt. "Trust. Not just in the wild, but in people. In the idea that connection matters, even when it comes from the last place you expect. I was lost, Jack, and the wild, Scout. He reminded me that you're never as alone as you think." A flicker of movement drew her gaze. There, in a patch of sunlight on the ridge's far side, Scout appeared. Proud, scarred, more majestic than ever. His mate lingered behind him, her golden eyes cautious, and the kittens, nearly grown, prowled in the shadows. The family paused, watching the rangers with that same ancient wariness and flicker of recognition. For a moment, the world held its breath. Jack grinned, awestruck. "He's here!" Becky didn't move, barely daring to breathe. She met Scout's gaze, and something old and gentle passed between them. She remembered every moment. The freezing night, the pain, the wild hope, the courage of trust given and returned. Scout's tail twitched. He took one slow step forward, then another. His mate chuffed softly, then slipped away into the trees. The kittens followed, vanishing like smoke. Scout remained a moment longer, as if offering a final benediction. Becky nodded, her heart full. "Thank you," she whispered. Scout blinked, slow, regal, utterly untamed, then turned and melted into the pines, leaving only the imprint of his presence and the wild energy he carried. Becky watched until she could see nothing but sunlight and leaves. They hiked on, moving through a world that felt brighter, safer, more true. Back at the cabin that afternoon, Becky and Jack sat on the porch, sipping strong coffee, watching shadows stretch across the clearing. The events of the winter seemed almost dreamlike now, sharpened only by the weight of the lessons they'd brought. Becky flipped open her journal and after a moment wrote, "If you find yourself lost and alone, remember, help may come from where you least expect it. Trust is built at the edge of survival, and it's what saves us every time." She put down her pen, satisfied. The cabin's screen door banged open, and a couple of rookie rangers called out, waving maps and questions. Becky stood, rolling her shoulders. She was the leader now, not just of a team, but of a community changed by one wild act of trust. The town, too, was different. Roads near the reserve now bore new signs: Wildlife Trust Zone, watch for bobcats. Scout's story became a kind of legend. Parents told it to children. Hikers swapped tales at the general store, and each spring, families left flowers at the place where Becky had been found. For Bitter Creek, the wild was no longer something to fear, but something to honor and protect. That evening, as dusk painted the sky in violet and rose, Becky and Jack took one last walk. The woods glowed, full of hidden life. In the hush beneath the ancient trees, Becky paused, letting the quiet fill her. She reflected, not on her suffering, but on what she'd gained: a sense of humility, a renewed capacity for trust, a belief that the wild, even at its fiercest, could be a source of connection and redemption. For all those listening, she wanted her story to offer hope. "If you're ever lost," she said softly, "remember, sometimes rescue comes in fur and claws, or in an outstretched hand you never thought to take. Sometimes it's the wild itself that reminds us what matters: trust, survival, and the bonds we make in the hardest moments." A final glimmer of movement caught her eye. Scout, silhouetted at the edge of the trees, just for a heartbeat, before vanishing like a secret into the dusk. Becky smiled, tears blurring her vision, and turned to Jack. "We're never truly alone," she whispered. "Not out here, not anywhere." They stood together in the fading light, side by side, with the wild whispering its ancient truths all around them. And as the stars blinked awake above the pines, Becky Grady knew she'd never doubt again the power of trust, earned, given, and returned, in circles as wide and enduring as the forest itself.